Hello to Professor Renzo's class. My name is Ken Lewin. I'm a HACC librarian. I may have met a few of you in person, but now we're in different times. So the purpose of this video that I'm making is to introduce you to a new way of thinking about the information you find online. Before the internet, the barriers to reaching a wide number of people with your views was significant. Having to have physical copies meant the number of people exposed to your ideas was limited by the number of copies you could produce, or at least convince others to produce, as in through publishers. And when publishers produced your work on a large scale, you had to follow their rules through editing so they could protect their investment. And part of protecting their investment meant the works that they published needed to be largely truthful, or at least not easily falsifiable. Fast forwarding a few decades, the interconnectedness of the internet provided a way for ideas to be transmitted without physical copies, and so without the safeguards of editing. For a few years after its popularization, nothing that was published to the internet had world-altering consequences. It was a place that you went to and then could leave behind. More people were using it year over year, but you still wouldn't say everyone was using it, or that anyone had to use it. When smartphones and mobile broadband became the norm, though, it stopped being a place to go. It was where you were. Even more than that, social media enticed us to participate in more media consumption and distribution, to the tune of around 350,000 tweets per minute, or around 500 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute. We're always consuming, and sometimes producing information, especially as students. And misinformation is out there and can cause real-life consequences. With that in mind, I want to touch very briefly on the elephant in the room that is making this kind of remote learning necessary. With the true information about COVID-19 being updated and seemingly changing from day to day, misinformation is bound to get in. I just urge you to be vigilant and especially critical of information you come across that seems to run counter to the consensus of respected medical organizations because of the serious consequences for being wrong. I also provided some links to specifically combat COVID-19 misinformation. So for this video, I just want all of us to be able to evaluate web sources in the context of your upcoming paper, but also in the context of the information you're coming across online each day. So, a common tool that librarians have tried to use to help students understand web evaluation since the internet was a place you went to are standardized checklists like CRAP or ABCD, where a web page is selected and the student has to answer questions like, when was this published? Are there obvious spelling errors? And other things to determine whether this page was suitable for use. The sad fact is that checklists can take a lot of time to find the answers to, which means students are unlikely to use them outside the context of whatever assignment they find them in. Even worse, checking more or fewer boxes doesn't always correlate with a source being more or less reliable. In fact, for something like the CRAP test, you could have articles that check all the boxes and look legitimate that were constructed to mislead. What I'm going to talk to you about is called the SIFT method, developed by Mike Caulfield, an author and learning director at Washington State University, Vancouver. Each of the steps here are called moves because it's not so much another checklist as a way of moving closer to the truth. Once you get more comfortable using this method, the process becomes faster and it's easier to feel confident that what you end up with is reliable information. Our first move, perhaps ironically, is to stop. Why would that be? Our default mode is as passive consumers of information. Just think about whether you've shared an article on social media without reading past the headline. It's hard work to think critically about everything that comes across our social media and news feeds. In addition, you may feel some strong emotion like happiness, anger, pride, or vindication when you see those news headlines. Part of the reason pages called clickbait are so effective is because they appeal to that emotional part of your brain that can react faster than the intellectual, analytical part can say, hey, this doesn't seem right. So, really when we stop, we're waiting for all parts of our brain to get on the same page. When you are asked up front to stop, what we want to convey is really considering what it is you're looking at before sharing. Stopping before proceeding can also give you a chance to address any biases you feel towards the subject. We all have biases. We need to take time to be aware of them, and more importantly, take the time to consciously consider them so we can evaluate information more objectively. When you stop, you can think about your purpose in looking at this article. You'll want to have some idea where the information is coming from, no matter what the purpose. But more important issues such as your health, legal matters, or a graded paper will require a more thorough investigation. And even starting off, but especially after investigating internet sources for a while, you'll be able to consider anything you already know about the source, and even its author, that will either make investigating easier or give you cause for concern. So, after you've given yourself a chance to center on what this source will be for, what you already know about it, and trying to think analytically and objectively about it, it's time for our second move, which is investigating the source. In class, you've discussed the rhetorical triangle, where the author of a work, its purpose, and the audience it's intended for make up the framework of the argument. So we learned that the expertise and motivation of the author play a major part in the effectiveness of the points they're trying to make. Investigating the source is about figuring out what authority or credibility the publisher, and to various extents the author, have to make the claims they make. In some versions of the checklists, authors will recommend reviewing the About page of the site in question. Since an About page will generally be part of their own website, though, the website authors are under no obligation to be truthful about themselves. An unreliable or suspect source is not going to say, "We are an unreliable or suspect source" in their About page. This is why, to really know about a source, we need to figure out what others say about them, or check with a third party. A helpful tool for third-party evaluation of online publications are media bias sites. These have developed a list of publishers and assess their reputation for reliability and story bias through various means. I provided a link for 2, but there are others that you might want to try as well. Consider what media bias sites conclude about the site that you are on. If it's not listed on these, you can Google search the source name and bias or controversy for a different third-party take. And for all the flack it gets for being cited as a source, Wikipedia can be good for investigation of a source with its principles of consensus and neutrality. Mike Caulfield recommends the simple Google search, top website address plus Wikipedia. Here, he demonstrates the technique with the text he received. Is this a legitimate site for news like this? Following the recommended search, we can see, yes, this is a long-standing and respected product review site that would be a legitimate source for information on voice-enabled toilets. The strategy of investigating your source is also about saving time in your research, because you can figure out whether particular articles would even be worth reading. If the site turns up as unreliable, or the author controversial, do you want to invest more time in seeing how much more controversial or unreliable? Or do you just want to try and find a more appropriate source? If we think of an academic assignment as a wall you're building, think of the sources that you use as the foundation of that wall. Metaphorically speaking, having sagging, or crumbly, or lightweight foundation blocks in your wall can affect the whole wall, and can even cause it to fall apart. Be cautious with what you use for your foundation. Our third move from the SIFT method is find better coverage. Finding similar coverage of the same story from other sources can give a rough idea of the consensus behind that particular story. On the other hand, finding various diverging takes can indicate a controversial topic, or even that the source you're considering is a minority viewpoint. Minority viewpoints are not in and of themselves a bad thing, but certainly something to keep in mind when you're trying to make a point with them. While finding similar coverage of a story can be helpful in your analysis, finding the same story will be less helpful. Stories with the same text on multiple sites may be an indication of syndication, in which a reporting company sells their stories to multiple publishing outlets with the goal of having more robust coverage. In some cases, though, it can indicate the kind of minimal effort that propels clickbait to make a profit. several different websites, perhaps with altered titles, with the intent of hooking various diverse crowds for their advertising dollars. To reiterate, finding multiple copies of the same article does not mean you need to rule the article out. It just means you have some work to do. You might find yourself feeling unsure about the particular article you came across, but not sure what the next step could be. In many cases, there's no good reason to be attached to that particular article so much as the claim the article is making. If that is the case, you may want to review the media bias site and find sources that are more well regarded, then search those sites for coverage. This goes back to building a good foundation. Even if they are saying practically the same thing, a trusted, more centered source will beat a heavily biased source all the time. Anyone checking your reference list is bound to be more critical of a claim if it's credited to something like InfoWars versus the Wall Street Journal. It may also be a benefit to try and find sources that go into more depth on the subject. More in-depth suggests more time spent with the subject material, with possibly more details revealed. But don't jump to this as your driving motivation at the expense of other critical steps. Bad actors can invest plenty of time in establishing misleading arguments too. Finally, a note on the when of a source. While useful sources can be generated anytime, keep in mind that more current coverage, especially on a developing story, may have additional information or insights unavailable to older sources. If you find yourself thinking that information could have updated since the story's publication date, consider searching for something more recent. In something that's become a trope of modern life, if a public figure or celebrity is confronted with a particularly controversial sounding quote of theirs, they might say that it was taken out of context. Sometimes that defense is used as a deflection, but in many cases context does matter, and we need to verify what that context is. This is why our fourth move is trace claims, quotes, and media back to the original context. Do a search to try and track down the original source of the claim or quote. Your source may include hints on where to look, like press release or interview with. Once you track it down, if you come away from the original thinking the take your source provides is justified, you can be more confident in using it. If it seems dubious, you may want to reconsider its use. Once you track it down, you might even be able to use the original source as your source material, depending on your need. I'd like to wrap up talking about SIFT by giving you a quote from Mike Caulfield. In some cases, these techniques will show you that claims are outright wrong, or that sources are legitimately bad actors who are trying to deceive you. But even when material is not intentionally deceptive, the moves do something just as important. They reestablish the context that the web so often strips away, allowing for more fruitful engagement with all digital information. I hope this video has been a help to you. I would be remiss if I didn't say that librarians are available and can help you with every step of this process. Just click the Ask Us button on HACC or any other library webpage to start a chat. Thanks for your time, and stay safe.